Good afternoon and welcome to members of the media, viewing and listening audience, and welcome to our post-cabinet press briefing. I am joined this afternoon by Minister of National Security and our Minister of Energy and Energy Industries, who are here to discuss specific issues, and I will start off immediately with the Minister of Energy and Energy Industries.
Thank you very much, Mr. Simon D. Nobrega, our newly minted Minister of Communication, and it's the first press conference I'm attending, which he's chairing. Today, what I plan to deal with is the surrounding issues as it relates to the Point Lisas industrial estate. You will be getting certain narratives coming out of certain writers and commentators that the Point Lisas estate is under severe threat. While certain challenges exist, I think to say it is under severe threat is a misnomer. But first, let me deal with some specific issues. You saw that yesterday, Nutrien announced the idling indefinitely of its ammonia O3 plant. That plant is the oldest plant of the Nutrien 4 plants. That plant was actually a plant that was brought from California and reassembled in Trinidad and Tobago. Its capacity is 365,000 metric tons per annum out of Nutrien's total production of 2.2 million metric tons per annum, which represents a mere 15 to 16% of their total production. The second specific issue is the ongoing discussions between MHTL and the NGC, and by extension, the government. Only yesterday, we had an agreement with MHTL to keep its M5000 plant operational. In the first instance, for 3 months, going to the end of this year, as we continue to negotiate a long-term contract for 3 to 5 years. That deal includes more gas for MHTL, in which they can use to restart the M3 plant that was also idled a couple months ago. M2 plant, sorry, that was idled a couple months ago. I'm going to make the point that the M5000 plant is the world's largest methanol plant. It is the most efficient plant on the estate, and it is important that we find solutions to keep it operational in spite of extremely low commodity prices. I started with those 2 specific issues to put the whole petrochemical sector into context. First and foremost, I want to make the point that operating in Point Lisas are 3 of the world's largest petrochemical manufacturers, traders, and marketers. They include MHTL, which is probably one of the top 2 players in methanol, Methanex, also in the top 3, and Nutrien, a key player on the ammonia market coming out of Canada. Despite the challenges of low commodity prices, which I will deal with shortly, those companies have indicated to the government that they are in it for the long haul. We are experiencing what we call the COVID effect of petrochemical prices. Ammonia and methanol are significantly, in some cases, and sometimes approaching under $200 US dollars per metric ton. Those same commodities were selling at between $250 to $300 a metric ton 1 year ago. It is difficult to survive in an environment like that, especially as the market has dwindled. The industrial market for ammonia has virtually disappeared. The market for methanol has been halved. So there's a surplus of supply on the international market. And it's only very efficient and cost-effective plants can continue to remain operational. We have gotten the commitment from these three international world-renowned companies that they are in Trinidad for the long haul. They will rally through this low period, which nobody knows how long it will be, but it is hoped that probably in the first quarter of next year, we can see a pickup on it. Everybody has to take a haircut. In the context of the entire value chain, the upstreamers have already taken a haircut. We have been successful in negotiating lower gas prices with BP, with BHP, and with EOG. The NGC has cut their margins significantly as the aggregator, sometimes to almost ground zero, where they have no markup. And they're just absorbing that cost in the interim, again, to rally us through this period of low methanol and ammonia prices. And by the same token, I want to thank the petrochemical companies out of Point Lisas, these three in particular, for continuing to rally to the cause. Certain plants have been idle, and the plants that have been idle are the least efficient ones. Okay, those that are more efficient continue to operate. And as we see an upturn in prices in the future, how long that future is, we don't know. But once we get an upturn in the prices and it goes above 200 and hopefully to 250 per metric ton of these commodities, we expect to see the restarting of some of these plants. I make the point because the government is doing nothing wrong. The government is trying its best through its gas value chain committee, which the Prime Minister announced recently. That committee is chaired by Mr. Wendell Motley, and it includes Minister Young and myself. And we are meeting with all the players in the gas value chain, upstreamers, midstreamers in the NGC, downstreamers in petrochemical, and under the expert advice of a company called Gas Strategies out of the UK as a resource personnel and a resource consultant. We are now seeing this thing not in silos, but as a gas value chain. And every entity in the value chain, upstream, midstream, downstream, and trading, are now putting their heads together to craft solutions where everybody can survive. Because in a chain is as strong as its weakest link. If there is no demand in downstream, what will the upstreamers do with their gas? And if there's no supply from the upstream, there's no downstream, and if there's no transportation, aggregator, and tolling company that the role the NGC performs, the industry cannot survive because the aggregator is not only to take a markup of buying and selling. The aggregator is to stabilize the production so that everybody can get enough gas to keep their plants operational. Because if a downstreamer has a direct contract with upstream company A, and upstream company A goes offline, his plants goes offline. But if you come through an aggregator, the aggregator can redistribute supplies from other companies so that all the plants can become operational. So as I conclude, the key points that I'm making are as follows. One, the government is in charge and it is in control and it is working assiduously to bring the Point Lisas matter into a stable and acceptable solution despite the challenges we face. We are engaging upstream, midstream, and downstream. Every component of this chain is doing their part. They are all making sacrifices for Trinidad and Tobago. Again, I want to thank the upstreamers, BP, Shell, EOG, and BHP. I want to thank the NGC for its role it has been playing in this crisis, and also to thank the understanding and commitment of the downstream players in trying to keep their plant operational as we go through this major market challenge in terms of the COVID situation. So all in all, I think as a government and as an industry, we are doing reasonably well despite the challenges. Other countries are suffering even greater than Trinidad is suffering. In Chile, plants are closing down left, right, and center. And certain high-cost plants all over the world are facing serious challenges. we, despite the challenges we face, I think we have been doing a reasonably good job, and we are trying our best as a government in conjunction with all the players to keep the industry alive and well, and obviously the factors that are not under the control of the government, especially as it relates to commodity prices, we continue to monitor it very, very closely. I thank you.
Thank you, Minister, for providing us with the necessary context regarding the ongoing situation, both locally and internationally in the petrochemical industry. Minister Young.
Thank you very much, Minister De Nobrega. Good afternoon, members of the media, wider viewing and listening public of Trinidad and Tobago. I'm here today to address a number of immigration matters, and they're really broken into two categories. The first is, I saw today's Express editorial where unfortunately it was quoting one side of a story and jumping into an arena without getting the facts from the other side. Let me assure the population of Trinidad and Tobago, so I'm here today really to clarify and to make sure that the facts are known to the public. And the editorial was about deportation of illegal immigrants, Venezuelans, and certain lawyers going to court to try to get orders of stays to stop the deportation of individuals. And there was a suggestion on allegation that the state did not abide by any orders granted by the court staying deportations, and persons were deported in variance with orders of the court. First of all, I'd like to assure the population of Trinidad and Tobago that this government is committed to doing everything in accordance with the law and in accordance with due process. Also, as we've said time and time again, and as I have said time and time again as the Minister of National Security in particular, no one is above the law. Thirdly, all repatriations of Venezuelans within the last few months have been done in complete accordance with the laws of Trinidad and Tobago. All of them have been done, including the most recent. I'd like to remind the population that one of the cries we hear constantly, and understandably, especially in the middle of a global pandemic that is COVID-19, is with respect to border security and keeping our borders closed. So if you're keeping your borders closed, it means that you have to deal with illegal immigrants and persons illegally entering your borders in a certain manner and a certain fashion. Before we get to the pandemic, that, as you are aware, from March of this year, March 23rd, we closed our borders to both nationals and non-nationals. I'd like to deal with the issue of illegal immigrants. Even before the COVID pandemic, we have a policy here in Trinidad and Tobago, or domestic law, that with respect to illegal immigrants, we deal with them in accordance with the Immigration Act, and that is what we've continued to do. As things worsened in Venezuela not too long ago, over the last few years, we are all aware that they began a migration of Venezuelans to Trinidad and Tobago. Initially, there were suggestions, including a suggestion by the UN, that there were 40,000 illegal immigrants or 40,000 Venezuelan refugees, a term that persons like to use very loosely in Trinidad and Tobago. That was around 2017. We first saw this number arise, 2017, 2018, and a suggestion that there were 40,000 Venezuelan refugees in Trinidad and Tobago. As you know, things unfortunately got worse in Venezuela in 2018 into 2019. And if things worsen, you would expect there to be even more migration of persons to Trinidad and Tobago. Your government took a humanitarian decision to have a Venezuelan migrant registration scheme in May into June of 2019. And at that point in time, the government policy that was announced from this very table repeatedly, we would have a 2-week period where all Venezuelans in Trinidad and Tobago, whether you came in legally or illegally, you should come forward and register. And there would be no repercussion to those who had come in illegally once you came to this Venezuelan migration registration process. At the end of that 2-week process, and you all will recall, apart from Tobago, on the end, the last day, a Friday, in Port of Spain at the Oval, there were no lines outside when we had reached the 5 o'clock point. In San Fernando, we were able to ring fence the persons who were there at 5 o'clock and to register everyone into the early hours in the morning. In Tobago, there was a little mix-up. Persons were moved away from the registration process just before. What we did is we then worked through the rest of the weekend to allow those who were there on Friday to register. At the end of that humanitarian process, we registered 16,523 Venezuelans in Trinidad and Tobago. And I repeat, we had made the announcement that anyone, whether you came in legally or illegally from Venezuela, you should come forward and register. That number of 16,523, of course, did not equate to the suggestion in 2017, 2018 of 40,000, which I assume was just an estimate at the time. At the time we were doing this registration process, I met with the heads of the UNHCR and other bodies, and I remember the conversation very vividly at the Parliament building. The Attorney General was one of the persons present, where I made it very clear to the UNHCR that whilst we understood their process of registration, domestically in Trinidad and Tobago, our obligation is to keep our population safe and secure, and we would abide by our domestic laws in Trinidad and Tobago. We would continue to respect the work of the UNHCR, but we also made it clear that by mere holding of a registration form or a receipt that a person had registered with the UNHCR, it would not trump our domestic laws. We also made it clear that if anyone engaged in illegal activity in Trinidad and Tobago, they would face the full brunt of the law, which may include, in the case of an illegal immigrant, deportation, and in some other instances, they may even be incarcerated after being convicted or charged for criminal activity in Trinidad and Tobago. We went a step further with our policy and made it clear, and I'm going to repeat it here again today, even if a person holds a Venezuelan migration registration card, it does not permit you to break the laws of Trinidad and Tobago. And we reserve the right that if a person holds that card and they've broken our laws, the card can be revoked and their legal status based on the possession of that card or their registration to get that card would be revoked, and therefore they become subject to deportation or to being incarcerated. At every step of the way, we follow these policies and the laws of Trinidad and Tobago. When people ask for us to secure the borders, and we have been doing so to the best of our ability at national security in a multi-agency attempt, it will include that when you pick up illegal immigrants, not only from Venezuela, but from anywhere, that you deal with them in accordance with the law. That can mean temporary incarceration at the Immigration Detention Center until we can deport you or otherwise. What has been happening within recent times with respect to illegal immigrants and those from Venezuela, we have been repatriating them in accordance with our domestic law. So persons who are suggesting, and I'll just explain very briefly the UNHCR process. So when persons enter the country, and not only from Venezuela, but from anywhere else, they go and they attempt to register the illegal immigrants at the UNHCR. And what they do is they get a receipt that they've registered in the process. International law, what is supposed to happen is those persons are supposed to be processed by the UNHCR. And if they are found to have legitimate grounds for asylum or refugee status, asylum in particular, they are then placed in some other country that is willing, by the UNHCR, that is willing to take these persons who have now been certified as asylum seekers. It is not plausible, nor is it our policy, in particular in a pandemic. And the law is that when you have things like a pandemic, and it was recently upheld by the Justice Budu Singh decision, that allows for the state to do certain things to protect its population. So when you now have persons who are entering your borders illegally in the state of a pandemic, we need to protect the people. People are calling for border control, border security. When you find illegal immigrants entering, what is it that you expect the state to do? So we started a temporary immigration facility for the quarantining of these persons at the heliport of Trinidad and Tobago to keep them separate from the rest of the population. That is going well. It's been certified by the Ministry of Health, and we've been doing what needs to be done. I'd just like to add as well, the day that we stopped registering Venezuelans back in June 2019, we also invoked a visa requirement procedure. So you now, as a Venezuelan, require additionally a visa to legally enter Trinidad and Tobago. Holding a Venezuelan registration migration card does not allow you to go and come. You need a visa. Even if you have a work permit, you need a visa. It is the same thing like any one of us Trinidadians entering a country like Canada, a country like United States. If we don't have a visa and we enter, we're illegal immigrants, and we will be deported, we can be incarcerated. That was introduced for persons from Venezuela. When the pandemic began and we closed the borders on the 23rd of March, we introduced not only for non-nationals, but now for nationals, it is illegal to enter the border without permission from the Minister of National Security. So you now have 3 domestic laws of Trinidad and Tobago being broken by any illegal immigrant, in particular from Venezuela, entering our borders currently. 1, it is in breach of the Immigration Act. 2, you're entering without a visa. That is also in breach of the Immigration Act. And 3, you're now in breach of our COVID regulations as they've come to be known because you've come across the border without permission. So the state's policy is very clear in these circumstances. If persons are held in those circumstances, they are detained and then they're repatriated to Venezuela. Recently, some lawyers have thought that it is advisable and they're entitled to go to court to try and get mixed up in this whole system. And we've actually had some very counterproductive orders and decisions being made because, of course, remember, we're in a global pandemic. We're in a COVID pandemic. It is possible that some of these persons may have tested or may be positive for COVID. So one of the things we began to do is test persons at the heliport. We have had instances, whilst we are attempting to protect the population of Trinidad and Tobago and quarantine persons, of lawyers going to court, the state not being represented because they're being heard ex parte, applications being made, persons being released, and afterwards we get the test results that these persons are positive for COVID. And of course, by now they've gone out in the population. They didn't come in here legally, so there's no proper recording. You don't know where they've gone, etc. So we are doing all that we have to do to minimize these risks to the population, and we will continue to do so. And every step of the way is being done in full conformity of the law. I'm being advised by senior counsel, and I'm also being advised by the immigration officials. Persons are being repatriated. We've had a number of repatriations along with the Venezuelan authorities. A UNHCR registration receipt does not trump the law of Trinidad and Tobago, nor will we allow it to trump the law of Trinidad and Tobago. We have our domestic legislation, and that is what we will continue to use. The fact that we signed a UN charter or treaty in 1967 or thereabouts is not something that we're disregarding. But even in circumstances when you're dealing with a pandemic, persons' constitutional rights as citizens of Trinidad and Tobago can be suspended to allow the state to protect the population, as was upheld recently by Justice Budu Singh and is being upheld in Commonwealth jurisdictions all over the world. So I'd like to put to rest any suggestion that the state is doing anything illegal, that the state is breaching any due process in dealing with these situations, in particular deportation or repatriation. There were no orders or stays granted by the court prior to the repatriation process that were breached. None. And it is going to be by some lawyers who want to make a living out of it, running to court. And I've wondered myself how it is that they're getting instructions from persons who are picked up, taken straight to the heliport, picked up coming in illegally, taken straight to the heliport. How are they giving these lawyers instructions? My legal mind, that bothers me. But nevertheless, the state is doing all that it can to protect the population of Trinidad and Tobago, make sure that we're upholding the domestic laws and we're not breaching any humanitarian rights, treating people with anything less than proper dignity, etc. But if you want border security, as we should, especially, I remind us, when we're in the middle of a global pandemic, that is COVID-19, these are the steps that must be taken and will continue to be taken by the government of Trinidad and Tobago. The second point I'd like to raise is yesterday I had a press conference. I see Mr. Douglas here. He was in attendance yesterday. And it was to announce some good work by the Immigration Division with respect to passports. You all would recall that there was a public conversation sometime not too long ago that it was taking too long for persons to renew passports and it was taking months, persons couldn't get appointments, etc. Knock on wood, we've taken certain steps. Again, one of the positives that came out of the COVID pandemic, we upgraded the systems, both hardware and software, at the Immigration Division with respect to all of their database. And now, with respect to passports, we've introduced a new system along with TT Post, where persons can go to TT Post, purchase a tracer pack, I believe it's called, a tracker pack for $25, take it into immigration. You fill out your application for your renewal of passport, you leave it with immigration. When your passport is completed, immigration puts it into this tracker pack and it's delivered via courier service, TT Post, to your home. So that's one level of efficiency. You're no longer required to come in and collect your passport. The online passport application system is also working quite efficiently at this stage, and persons are getting their, after they make an application for appointment, they are getting in to fulfill that appointment within a 2-week period. And the turnaround time for passports right now is between 5 days to 10 days. So that's another level of efficiency. I was asked in particular to address persons whose passports have expired. The answer is yes, the renewals are taking place. You just have to follow the system. In addition to the online system, we've also introduced a system where alphabetically, your surname on certain days, there's a certain number of positions and places that you can go in to a passport office, and you'll be facilitated in accordance with your surname on those specific days. The next step I've asked immigration to move towards is a full online system. So we have to work out the payment side, where you can just apply for a passport renewal online, make your payment online, the TT Post packs can be dropped off, and then the passport would be delivered to you. That is where we're moving towards. Also, another positive coming out of COVID is I've begun conversation with the Minister of Works and Transport for when the borders do eventually open, that we need to see if we can make a more efficient immigration system at the airport, move towards biometrics and the use of technology at the airport to make it a more efficient system and try and do away with the immigration form, the physical form that exists right now. So I'm happy to say that the Immigration Division has moved expeditiously and seem at this stage to have sorted out a lot of the inconveniences that take place with respect to the application for a new passport or the renewal. Now, this is not an invitation to go and flood the system as it works efficiently, but we are taking the steps to make it a more efficient, more customer-oriented system. So those are the two issues I will ask to deal with today, and I thank you, and at this stage we take some questions.
Thank you, Minister Young. Can I ask that we address questions to Minister Khan first, and then we move to Minister Young after?
Young, TV6 News. Minister Khan, in terms of solutions with regard to point leases, because you mentioned that the government is working with the upstreamers, the downstreamers, midstreamers in terms of solutions. Put that in the context of the present gas supply situation in Trinidad and Tobago, and at point leases in particular.
Well, the gas supply situation is not as good as it was 5 or 6 years ago, but it is still at an acceptable level where we can service both streams of utilities. One, Atlantic LNG, and two, petrochemicals coming out of Point Lisas. What it means in terms of the economics of the plants, it seems as though some of the least efficient, smaller, old plants could get displaced. Okay, but I say that guardedly. But by and large, the Point Lisas industrial estate will be protected to at least 75 to 80% of its current capacity. And so too, we see the Atlantic trains to continue, bearing in mind the unknown in this equation is what would be commodity prices in the near term and medium term, both for ammonia and methanol and also for LNG, because there is a glut in the LNG market as we speak.
So what does that mean in terms of, let's say, the profit margins of the NGC?
Well, obviously the profit margin of the NGC, most of NGC's profit was as an aggregator. They buy at X and they sell at X plus 2. Okay? Well, let's say X plus N. N is now less than what it used to be. But for NGC to survive, n cannot be equal to 0 or be a negative number. However, we're willing to forego some of that in the period of this trough in commodity prices because everybody has to take a haircut. The upstreamers, through negotiations and through prudent negotiations, are taking a haircut. The quantum of investment involved in drilling and building an offshore platform is very, very high. So they have to pay back on their capital. Okay, so again, everything is driven by market demand. What we do is we sell products to the world. We don't do anything with the gas. The gas goes into electricity generation in Trinidad. Beyond that, we make liquefied natural gas. We export via tankers. We convert that into petrochemicals, urea, methanol, ammonia, UAN. We export that. And that is the end product that brings you money. And then that is net backed to the wellhead. Okay, so that is where the whole value chain comes in. And in the interim, everybody will be making less profit in the chain. But in a long-term business cycle, it is nothing unusual. Oil prices were $8, $10, $15 in the past, and these big energy companies survived. Trinidad survived as an economy. So I want us to see this period as a short-term stumbling block to the energy sector. We have to be optimistic that it will pick back up. As to the time frame in which it will pick back up will depend on market conditions, which we have no control over. But we must continue with the optimism, and we must put what we can do to put in place for it to survive. And that is what the government is doing.
If I may just assist here by just adding my 2 cents, as I work very closely with Minister Khan, and we've been working hard at this for the last 5 years. One of the objective tests that seem to be missed here, Trinidad and Tobago, and you mustn't follow what the naysayers are saying, is will the multinationals continue to invest their limited global capex? So these big multinationals have a sum of money that they decide where do we invest it in the world. And as the Prime Minister and Minister Khan spent some time last week with BHP, you see them still spending money in unprecedented deep water drilling in Trinidad and Tobago. Shell, the same thing. BP, the same thing. EOG, the same thing. And even the downstreamers, they have been spending money in these times where there's a glut of global commodity, so a glut of methanol and ammonia. They've been spending money upgrading their plants and doing the turnarounds in Trinidad and Tobago. So all of this screaming, wishing the worst on Trinidad by some of the naysayers, and we know who they are, saying that the whole thing is about is simply not true. When you look at it objectively, the international players continue to invest in Trinidad and Tobago. What we're facing are the effects of a global crash. It's nothing short of a global crash. When you look at the prices of the ammonia and methanol over this COVID period, they have gone way south. And the commodity sales just aren't there because the demand has dried up during the period when everything was shut down and closed globally. It's not Trinidad and Tobago. You all would have seen, for example, things circulating, news items circulating with respect to Dubai and how Dubai can run. When you hear a story that somewhere like Dubai can run out of money in the next 3 months, that's frightening. Trinidad and Tobago is nowhere near that.
And just to add to what Minister Young said, look at who the players are in Trinidad. We should feel privileged. On the upstream side, Shell and BP, they're only second to third to ExxonMobil, you know. Then you have BHP coming in, and then you have EOG. Down on the petrochemical side, you have MHCL, largest, or the top 2 largest methanol producers and marketers, Methanex, Nutrien. They are all global players. Atlantic LNG, a world-class company. When Train 4 was built, Train 4 was the largest single train of LNG in the world. So is M5. So we are top-ranking global players facing a challenge like any other country. And I think we are handling it relatively well.
Could any of you put that, just one more question, in terms of the budget? Because you're talking about the products that bring in basically the majority of the revenue, the LNG, the ammonia, methanol, and so given the announcement by the Finance Minister in terms of the deficit, how does the government deal with this in the context of the budget for the next fiscal year?
Julie, you don't have to wait long for the budget. The budget is in a couple weeks, but what I can tell you is the Ministry of Finance has gone through these cycles time and time again, and they will do like they do every single year when they're planning the budget. They will look at international projections and forecasts from a pricing point of view and use that to determine. But we'll hear from the Minister of Finance on the 5th of October, not too long from now.
That's newsy.
Okay, I had a general question. This La Joqueta, there's been some activity in La Joqueta, and we'd ask, is there a concern to government that these schemes, some people say the word susu, some say pyramid, some say circle of blessing, but whatever it is, Ponzi scheme, is there a concern as to what's been happening?
Absolutely. You all would have seen the two regulators come out within recent weeks warning the population. The Commissioner of Police recently joined it as well, warning the population against what are known as pyramid schemes. Pyramids, so you had the Trinidad and Tobago Security and Exchange Commission as well as the central bank warn the public against getting caught in a pyramid scheme. It doesn't matter what you call a pyramid scheme. We all know in Trinidad and Tobago parlance what a susu is. So they may call a pyramid scheme a susu, but it is not a susu. As you know and as you are aware how a susu works, it's 10 of us, each of us 1 week, we put in $10. Mr. Ramdeo on the first week will get $100, but he has to continue for the next 9 weeks putting in his $10, right? So it's basically a loan and a cash loan up front to whoever. That's a susu scheme. A pyramid scheme is fraud. A pyramid scheme is designed to collapse at some stage. So I was in the office not too long ago and the young people were asking me, Minister, you bring two? You bring, and I had no clue what they were talking about. And they were teasing me and they were all laughing. Minister, you didn't bring two, you have two? And I had no clue what they were asking me about. And then afterwards, they did, just as you said, so there's a current pyramid scheme that was a bring two. So you walk with one, you walk with Minister Khan, Minister Nobrega, I walk with the two of them, all of us put in our money, then we go and we bring, and that is a pyramid scheme. So yes, there's a concern because we never as a government want to see innocent people lose their money, and now is an opportune moment as a government for us to warn persons, don't get caught up in these fraudulent schemes. Right now, there's an ongoing police investigation into what is going on in La Joqueta. First came to our attention where you saw scores of people breaching the public health protocols, the COVID regulation protocols, assembling outside a home. When we investigated it, the police investigated it, they found out that it is a possible scheme taking place. I saw yesterday they did a raid. I've received a report afterwards. I've seen the Commissioner of Police put out a further report today that two things struck me. One, it was $22 million in cash they counted. That is a huge, well, for me at least, that's a huge amount of money, $22 million in cash. Questions must be asked about the legitimacy of having $22 million in cash. It's not for me to play judge or jury. There's a current investigation. And then I think the Commissioner of Police's press release within the last few hours was that it appears as though the money was released back to the persons by the La Joqueta Police. I spoke to the Commissioner of Police just before going into Cabinet this morning, and he is conducting an investigation to find out how that happened. I am certain that the FIB side of the police will get themselves involved from the time you see that amount of money, and then they will need to determine that. That is a fairly complex investigation that needs to take place there to find out if all of us in this room went and gave our money, we got a receipt, etc., and we haven't been the victims of the collapse as yet. What is the criminal charge? But there are possible criminal charges, and I'll leave that up to the police under the Proceeds of Crime Act and other pieces of legislation. But yes, to answer your question, the government is concerned, and now is as good a time as any to warn the population of Trinidad and Tobago, don't get caught in any pyramid scheme. If it seems too good to be true, that is because it is too good to be true.
Minister, you had made a mention earlier concerning illegal immigrants, that by the time you got the test results that they had COVID, because of court actions that were taken to court, they were already released. Yep, in terms of numbers of how many?
Fortunately, it was a small number. So I was aware of 2 instances. The first was one person that actually was somebody who's on criminal charges. So we managed to deal with that matter, and it wasn't related. The person didn't come in as an illegal immigrant. All right. And then the second set was early one weekend of a family. And I think it was 3 persons, and 2 of them, we got back the test results positive there. To be quite honest, not sure what happened, but we were tracking and tracing them and what happened in those instances. But it is something that, and why I asked for senior counsel to be brought in, because in the continued protection of the population of Trinidad and Tobago, the government takes it very seriously, and we will fight those matters in court. And the court, I keep telling the lawyers, we need to put all of the facts before the court, not just let the claimant's lawyers put their version of events before. And the court needs to know that we're in a global pandemic. There's a risk of persons being positive. As we keep saying, it doesn't care about race, creed, religion, age, your color of skin, where you come from, or anything like that. And we need to do what we have to keep the population safe.
Do you have a number in terms of overall number of illegal immigrants who have tested positive for COVID?
No, I don't. But so far as I'm aware, it's been a very small number.
And also this has, in the past, the issue generally has raised the question about asylum laws, or at least bringing that to Parliament. Any update?
So, I mean, that's what I was referring to a short while ago. Where that conversation comes from, I believe, is a 1967 UN Treaty on Refugees. We have never put it into domestic legislation. In fact, I intend to go to Cabinet very shortly for us to have a proper policy as to how we deal with it, but being very conscious of the current world that we live in and the COVID pandemic. So I don't want to preempt any decision by Cabinet, but we continue to have no domestic legislation that allows for refugee status in Trinidad and Tobago.
Minister, Jesse Ramner from CNC3 News, right? As it pertains to, I know it's something you often address when you are in attendance with the Prime Minister at this press conference for COVID-19 updates. But as it pertains to the mask wearing legislation, any updates as to how many people
Have been charged?
Yeah, just and in terms and as it deals specifically with that, any minors are among those to have been charged?
That's a good question. I don't have the current information here. I mean, it changes every day. So every day as we get the report at the end of the day, I see the numbers going up. Thankfully, the numbers are going up very, very slowly, meaning at the beginning, the last time I stood at that podium 2 Saturdays ago, it was 259. It's gone up incrementally over the period of time. I have not seen any breakdown of any minors being charged. And I continue to just ask people, please wear your mask. It's been scientifically proven, and you're seeing how it does slow down the spread of COVID.
And I mean, not to preempt anything, but based on your conversations with the Commissioner of Police, as it pertains to the investigation, the Bayside pool party, any update as it pertains to that?
The Commissioner of Police and myself have not discussed the Bayside party within the last few days, so I'm not sure where that investigation is going. Meaning where it has reached.
Minister, there was a U.S. State Department report that we published about 2 or 3 days ago that was they were basically saying that alleged of corruption by some state officials, public officials, excessive bureaucracy and some unclearness with procurement could be a big disincentive to foreign direct investment.
Correct. So what that was out of the U.S. State Department, but with respect to the trade aspect. And what you find is if you go back and look at the history of these reports, and when they come, the few times that I see them, it's just a repeating really of what has been published the years before. And unless somebody consciously in the U.S. State Department goes and intervenes to change the language, it gets repeated the following year. But as it stands right now, I'd be very surprised if there was a current concern about any corruption taking place with this administration or even the previous administration. Certainly none of that has been brought to our attention. And up to last week, I was in a meeting with the U.S. ambassador and the Prime Minister and the Minister of Foreign and CARICOM Affairs, and there was absolutely no mention of that. I know in the past, for example, when we came in as an administration in 2015, if there are concerns, those concerns are brought to us at our level. Like I remember then Ambassador Estrada raising with the Prime Minister and myself in a meeting certain concerns they had with personnel in the Trinidad and Tobago police service who had been trained, specialist training by the US, and they were then dissipated everywhere. And we then raised it with the police and got them all back into the Special Evidence Recovery Unit, CERU, to do the work they're been trained to do. So there is always that constant dialogue, and nothing has been raised with us with respect to these matters.
Joel?
It's a follow-up to my colleague's question concerning the issue with Bayside. Not so much the actual investigation, but it has raised a conversation rather on the issue of private versus public space in terms of legal definition. How is the government looking at that? Because on the one hand, of course, the government wants to curb the spread of COVID, but then there are constitutional issues involved. How are you striking the balance?
Julius, see, since that last incident and since the last intervention into that conversation a few weeks ago, it hasn't raised its ugly head. We had conversations as well with the police, the Attorney General and myself, and I think let's just leave it there. The police know what they have to do. The police are applying the law, and I'd like to take the opportunity to thank them and to congratulate the police service in particular for the frontline work they've been doing and their policing of the regulations. There's no area of concern or gray area with that right now. Let's leave it that way.
In terms of any potential legislation looking at the issue of private space?
Not at this time, no.
You say?
The United Nations Human Rights Council recently issued a report on Venezuela, where they said that there were all sorts of things like killings or detentions, even torture, they use the word. And my question would be, does Trinidad and Tobago have a concern about that? Well, both like ideologically, as like to support democratic things, and then practically, if there is this unrest and it could be acting as a driver of migration, does Trinidad and Tobago have a concern at this report, and any thoughts at all?
We haven't at our level had any conversation about the content of that report. I saw it being reported. One of the things that stood out when I was reading the international reports is the report was written and persons were not in country. All right, so the report, the UN investigators were not actually on the ground in Venezuela. That was a bit of a unusual event for me, and I just leave that right there. But yes, of course, this government will always have concerns if there are issues of human rights violations, etc. But that is not for us. Our policy, our international policy, is non-interference, and at that stage, we just continue to maintain that. Venezuela continues to be, I remind you, a 7-mile neighbor, and we are the closest country to Venezuela.
In reference to Venezuela, in terms of the Dragon gas deal, is that just suspended indefinitely?
Well, I mean, we've addressed this many times before. Right now, there continue to be sanctions. So we had reached quite an advanced stage. I mean, it was an excellent stage. We actually had a commercial term sheet negotiated with some very favorable terms, but that's under sanction right now. We leave it right there. Trinidad and Tobago did not let that bring us to a grinding halt. In fact, one of the things you may recall Minister Khan had announced some time ago is we also then managed to separate Laura and Manatee so we can pursue the Manatee side of gas on our border and leave the Loran on the Venezuelan side of the border. And that's where our focus is.
And to add to that, that is a significant success. Because in lieu of Dragon, if we weren't able at the treaty level, which is international diplomacy between the Prime Minister and the head of state in Venezuela, to delink Loran from Manatee, we could not develop Manatee on our own, based on the treaty. So that is a major diplomatic and energy success for Trinidad and Tobago. And that is some of the things we need to be focusing on here in Trinidad. And that production is estimated to come on stream, once everything goes well, by 2024.
Another issue of the energy sector, the refinery. The deal, any update?
There is serious discussions proceeding as we speak at this point in time, in particular among the legal parties of both teams, and we expect a response in probably 7 to 9 days as to where we are, and at that point in time I'll be able to make a more definitive statement as to where we are. But as a government, we are committed to the deal.
Is anything that is causing a challenge in terms of, as you go
Well,
through
there are
it?
some specific challenges which we wouldn't want to go public with. It has been handled by the various attorneys of both parties.
Gentlemen, I'm going to take one or two more, then we'll wrap up. Okay, Jesse?
I think this is a generic question for each one of you guys. Where we're on the eve of the 44th celebration of Republic Day. In terms of our democracy, are you satisfied with the state of it in terms of transparency, accountability, the distribution of resources, in terms of satisfaction with our democracy?
I was going to address that at the end by just taking the opportunity to wish everybody a happy Republic Day, and for us as a society and as a country to just reflect, because being a republic is something you should be proud of. And I can say, as a Trinidadian citizen, a citizen of Trinidad and Tobago, I'm particularly proud that during our short life as a republic, we have done phenomenally well. And I think we can tick all of the boxes. I was reflecting on it last night. I mean, even things like press freedom. There's a completely free press here in Trinidad and Tobago. You may not always see eye to eye, but there's absolutely no interference, certainly by this administration. And so I think we have a thriving democracy. We've just come out of a very successful general election. Again, despite what happened in that 7-day period afterwards by the opposition, we've all moved on with our lives. We should be thankful for an independent EBC and everything. So God continue to bless Trinidad and Tobago. Happy Republic Day tomorrow. And let us continue to ensure that as a Republican state, we grow in the way that we've been growing over the past few years. All right?
Yeah, and just to add to that, from the energy standpoint, never has our government been so transparent on energy matters. For decades, the energy industry operated like a secret society. Nothing was available to the public. This Prime Minister was the first Prime Minister who insisted that the gas master plan be laid in Parliament. And since then, we have been continuing a narrative, bearing in mind confidentiality clauses as to strict commercial terms. But beyond that, we have been as open as this industry has ever been. And that sends the signal as to how open we are in other aspects of the economy. So, to join Minister Young, happy Republic Day to Trinidad and Tobago. It's a pity we cannot have all the ceremonies that we normally have, but everybody knows the reason why.
Okay. Guys, I also want to join with my colleagues in wishing the nation a happy Republic Day. Please continue to stay safe for yourselves and for others. Wear your masks and follow the safety guidelines. Thanks for joining us.